Hey, it's Mark Lanier with your video thought for the day. All right, we're finishing up this week where I've been looking at another 5 books of the Bible, giving each one a summary in 4 minutes. Today, we have the book of Ezra. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever faced a daunting task that seemed impossible to complete? If so, the book of Ezra may just be what you needed. The book of Ezra is a book that takes place after Israel has already not just existed as a nation, Israel and Judah, but been conquered, and Judah and the Jews were taken off into captivity in Babylon, and then the Persians took over from Babylon. And that's where we have Ezra, because King Cyrus of the Persians has risen to power. And King Cyrus allows the Jews to return and rebuild their temple, return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple and their lives. And this is something that the prophets had predicted would happen. They said that God would be faithful to Judah and the Jews would be allowed to return after 70 years in exile. Now, if you're sitting there counting the actual particular years, depending upon when they left, it's not always 70 years. It could be calculated a little bit higher, but 70 is a number of fullness, and it is a good roundable number. Just don't challenge it to the day. That's not the biblical point. God's prophecy was true, and the Jews returned. And the book of Ezra talks about what they did in returning. But we should never talk about it at all without realizing that it first and foremost talks about God's faithfulness to his promise. Now, when the people come back, before they even start building their homes, they start trying to rebuild the altar, the source of where they worshiped and found a right relationship with God. And that stress that the book gives of putting God and our worship of him first in our lives is a second point in that book that's really powerful in its message for us today. There's a third point that I'd bring out, and that is there was a lot of opposition to the Jews trying to rebuild, and yet they persevered. And I know that oftentimes when we're set about on the road of doing what God wants us to, as we're trying to draw nearer to God, there can be opposition. There can be every reason to fail that comes in front of us. But we can take a lesson from Ezra of how you stay committed and you persevere despite setbacks, despite difficulties, despite opposition, despite demoralization. Just put your hand to the plow and go forward. It's a wonderful lesson. So if I was to summarize here, not only would I talk about those 3 lessons that help us live, but I would say that it was all rooted in one of my favorite verses, Ezra chapter 7, verse 10. And in that verse it says, Ezra had set his heart, which is the mind as well. Ezra had set his mind to study the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach it. Wow. Think about that. Set your mind to study the ways of God, to do the ways of God, and to teach them. That's the way to get that task done. So in conclusion, with these lessons, what do I say? Reflect on God's faithfulness in your life. And put worship of God above your material concerns. And stay committed to those goals, to learn them and to do them and to teach them to others. That's why I've made this your video thought for today.